class, welcome back. We are continuing in our discussion of what is philosophy. This is the third video now, and we're going to talk about philosophy as an application and a system in this video. So we've talked about it. It's an area, it's a discipline, it's foundational. It's an attitude that has to do with the love of wisdom, and it's a method that we talked about last time that is using reason, and particularly reason as a test for meaning. So now we want to talk about where philosophy begins. It's an application, and it begins in self-examination. This is the uncomfortable part about philosophy, is you have to apply it to yourself. It's easy to go picking everybody else's philosophy apart, but it's harder to do for ourselves. So we have to start with self-examination. The first application of philosophy is to identify one's own basic belief and to test it for meaning. So we've been talking about in general now. Now let's be specific. What is your own basic belief? What do you think is the means for knowing? And what do you think is eternal? And what do you think is the good life? And you may have answers or you may not. And if you don't, then you have about, I don't know, so many weeks in this class to figure it out. I will present to you the various options, and you should land somewhere by the end of this class. There's no reason not to. So I will help you to see what the options are if you don't already know what you believe, and I will show you how to use reason to eliminate some of those options because they're meaningless. So the first application of philosophy is to identify your own basic belief and to test it for meaning. And by testing it for meaning, you're asking, does this view about, let's say, ultimate reality defy the laws of thought? Is this view contradictory at rock bottom? And if so, you might want to change it. Self-examination is necessary for integrity, and integrity is necessary and sufficient for knowledge. So this integrity piece is about being human. You're a human being, you're a rational being, and if you're not, then I don't know how you're in my class, because rational beings take my class. Human beings are rational beings, and rational beings implicitly claim to want to know. Integrity is consistency between what we say and what we do. So if you say you want to know and you don't know, that's a lack of integrity. So that's what philosophy is to help us to figure out. Do I really want to know, or do I just say I want to know? And if I really do want to know, why don't I know? And if I don't know and I want to know, I should seek after knowledge. So you have to examine yourself to see, do I have knowledge of these basic questions? And integrity is wholeness. It's consistency between what we say and what we believe. It's about not being divided against ourselves. So wholeness is a unity in ourself. We're going to have to talk about this as we go on. A unity in your being. Sometimes we're divided. We say this is the good, but we do this instead. That's division within ourselves, and it's uncomfortable to contradict yourself. And so philosophy, again, is about figuring out what you think is true, testing to see if it's meaningful, and then if it's true, and then living by it. Consistency, that's integrity. So you have some values coming in just studying philosophy. Humility, we've talked about, teachability, and now integrity. Integrity is, if you really want to know and you don't know, then do you really want to know? And if you really want to know, you will pursue it until you know it. And I would say, as a rational being, you should pursue knowledge of these basic things until you have answers. And you can have answers. And if you don't believe me, come show me at the end of the class that we can't have answers. How about that? At the beginning of the class, if you're saying we can't have answers, then I'm going to say, why not? Then it seems like you know something. Show it to me. Okay, here's a statement from Socrates that connects with this self-examination. He says, the unexamined life is not worth living. Why is that? Because the unexamined life is less than human life. Human life is rational and we should live according to reason, and to not do that is to live an unconscious, unthinking life, which is what a lot of people are doing. We're just going through the motions. We're not thinking it through. To live an unconscious and uncritical life is less than the life of reason, and is therefore less than human existence. It's like animal life. It's like senses. It's like feeding your appetites. Unthinking life for humans is wasted life. So if you're living just for the moment, living just for the pleasure of it, then what's the point? Is it wasting your life, your potential, your contribution to the good? Now, there's also something that's coming into play here that we're going to have to talk about, and that's the human soul. Do you have a soul? And is your soul unified? Socrates talks about the soul as having the intellect, the emotions, and the will, or the thinking part, the desiring part, and the doing part, the willing part. And those things can be disordered. So an ordered soul is also integrity. You put ideas before your emotions and your actions. You order yourself. You stop and think before you act. That's part of self-examination too. Why do I want to do this thing I'm going to do right now? Stop and think and ask yourself, do I have good reason for doing that? Or do I have good reason for feeling this way? Why do I feel this way? What is the cause of this feeling I'm having? Is it merely biology, or is it ideas that I have? And what about those ideas? Are they founded or unfounded in reason? Okay, so these are the questions I'd like you to think about in your quiet time. Can we fail to identify basic beliefs? Yes, we can. We can assume them, right? Have I failed to identify my basic beliefs? Can we falsely identify our own basic belief? Can we think we believe something and we don't really? For example, lots of people think they believe in God, but they don't act as if they do. I know someone who doesn't believe in God, but is going to act like there is a God just in case, right? So that's a kind of lack of integrity, right? Saying one thing and doing another. So can we falsely identify our own basic belief? Can reason be used critically without self-examination? And if so, how? So if we're really interested in using reason critically and asking what does that mean, would we fail to apply it to ourselves? Some philosophers do a really great job of critically analyzing and deconstructing other people's views, but they don't really apply it to themselves, and so they never get beyond their own shallow assumptions. I'm going to say it. There are some philosophers out there with very shallow assumptions, and it's because they didn't apply it to themselves. Maybe it's an attitude problem, going back to the love of wisdom. Maybe they've already started by saying, we can't know, and they have a cynical attitude from there, and they're going to show everybody else that they don't know as well. I would say back up, check your assumptions. If there is a lack of knowledge of basic things, is there a lack of integrity? So, in this class, I'm going to argue that there are basic things, and the basic things are clear to reason, and therefore they are knowable. So if they are knowable and we don't know them, then is it because we haven't used reason at the basic level to test our own assumptions? There's a lack of integrity. Okay, but the helpful news is, if we go, I have assumptions and I didn't prove them, then you can start working on it. This is the ultimate self-help area. We always like to do self-care, self-help. This is philosophical self-care. Stop, take a time out, figure out your basic beliefs, figure out why you think those things. Are the reasons you think those things good? And if not, maybe we need to work on that a little bit. And maybe you need like a philosophical coach. I'm here to help if you need. Okay, now let's move on to philosophy is a system which has to do with a world and life view. You know what? I'm going to pause and get my iPad out to draw pictures. iPad out so I can draw pictures connected to philosophy as a system. So philosophy is concerned with our world and life view, or your worldview. And a worldview is how we put together our epistemology, our metaphysics, and our ethics. So let's read through this and I'll draw. Philosophy uses reason to construct a coherent world and life view on the foundation of basic beliefs. So notice the terminology here, constructing on a foundation of basic beliefs. A worldview supplies meaning to all of life. A worldview is applied to life by shaping our attitudes and our values, which come to expression in the institutions of cultures and civilizations. That's a lot. So let me start small. I'm going to go to my iPad and draw. So we have the image of a foundation. I'm going to draw ground and then a foundation on the ground and then a house on the foundation. It's not super straight, but you get the idea, right? Here, let's clean this up a little bit because I want it to be pretty. Good enough, right? All right, now the bottom layer, the ground, we're going to call our epistemology. I guess I need the pencil back. Epistemology. And remember the question epistemology asks, how do I know? Right? How do I know? That's the most basic question in philosophy. It comes first. If we don't answer this question well, the rest of the house is going to not be very stable. Then we have the foundation, which is metaphysics. What is the question metaphysics asks? Do you remember? What is real? What is eternal? And what is human nature? We'll put that here too, human nature. Okay, that's going to be the basis upon which we build our world and life view, which goes here. How we live our life. Now I should draw a window in this house because you live here. This is your world and life view. And you are in the house looking out. Okay? And this is your ethics. What is ethics asking? What ought I to do, right? What ought I to do? This is questions about the good life. And it's questions about what do I value? What is my attitude like? So this is your world and life view. Philosophy is the tool that helps you to build a world and life view. Let's call it that. World and life view. A world and life view can be more or less coherent, where coherent means the parts fit together, they cohere. So think of bricks in a building being cohesive. They fit together. It makes a nice wall. So we want these pieces to fit together. And we're using reason as a test for meaning to see, does my metaphysics fit with my epistemology? Or are they contradictory? Does my metaphysics fit with my view of the good life? Or are they contradictory? All right, so we want to have a coherent world and life view. I'm going back to the handout here. So philosophy uses reason to construct, build a coherent world and life view on the foundation of basic beliefs. So I've drawn that, and you have a house. A world view supplies meaning to all of life. So the house is how we give meaning. And what are we giving meaning to? Our experiences. So let's go back to the house. So I want to draw, let's use green. Experiences come to you, and they're filtered through your epistemology, your metaphysics, and your ethics. So let's call the green experience. An experience could be sensory data like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. An experience could be life experiences like the death of a friend or the breakup of a relationship. So experiences need to be made sense of. We need to give meaning to them. So this is how we give meaning to our experience. Meaning, okay? So experience comes in, it's filtered through our world and life view, and that world and life view provides us with the interpretation, which is making sense of things, meaning, giving meaning to our experience. I'm going to go back to the handout. Now it also says a worldview is applied to life by shaping attitudes and values. So we can think of attitudes. We've talked about the love of wisdom. Is that your attitude? We've talked about cynicism too, an attitude of hopelessness with regards to knowing. There are other attitudes, a happy-go-lucky attitude, an optimistic attitude, a pessimistic attitude, but where do those come from? They come from our world and life view and our values, things we think are worth it, worth giving time, attention, money for. These come to expression in the institutions of cultures and civilizations. So here we need to talk about philosophies. Now notice this class is not a history of philosophy, although we will have a unit on the history of philosophy. The history of philosophy would look at how ideas in the form of systems of belief come to expression in different cultures. I will give you a unit on that. We live in the West, Western civilization. We're doing philosophy mostly from a Western perspective, although I will give you some Eastern ideas. And I want to talk about institutions because we don't often think about institutions of culture, but right now the institutions of culture are under attack by philosophy. It's almost like philosophy is eating itself. So let's talk about institutions. First, let's talk about culture. What is culture? Culture is what? Have you learned this in another class? Culture is a shared system of values. Shared system of values. And it's like people living in the same community with similar houses that I just drew. Okay, so think of a house as your worldview, and a culture is how worldviews are shared and come to expression in the arts, in cultural artifacts, music, things we create. Civilization is where we have culture in institutions. So let's talk about civilization is how culture is preserved and passed on from one generation to the next over time. So civilizations persist through time. How are they passed on? Through institutions. Now, institutions are somewhat natural and somewhat constructed. There are things that are true of all societies, like everyone's born of parents. Now, how we view the family is different. So there are some institutions I'm going to show you, and you could see how each of these has philosophy or philosophies undergirding them. So the institutions include family, religion, the state, economics, or the business world, and education. So each of these institutions is how a culture gets passed on. So you right now are part of these institutions. I don't know, maybe you're not part of religion. Some way you are, though. Somewhere along the line you are. The state is the government. The economy is the business world, the trade, education. Here we are in education right now. Family, you were raised by somebody. I was raised by wolves. Did you know that? but still they took care of me, and I'm here now. So each of these is how values and attitudes are passed on. This is the systemic philosophy of a culture. So you've heard of things like systemic racism, systemic problems. This is the system that is being questioned in our civilization right now. Did what was passed on, were they just assumptions or were they knowledge? And if they were just assumptions, were they bad assumptions? Were they biased assumptions? So we're working this out in our civilization right now. And as we go through the class, I will show you some of the history that led to our questioning the assumptions that were passed on to us in Western philosophy. Okay, so let's go back to the handout now. So worldviews are held more or less consciously and more or less consistently in every culture and civilization. Right now, the differences in Western civilization are being brought to the forefront, to our consciousness through challenges. So there are internal and external challenges of reason to the consistency of every worldview. So right now in the West, we have an internal division, and it may come out in terms of something like cultural Marxism or critical theory and traditional Western values. Either way, there's a challenge. And then there are external challenges. What about all the other views? What about Eastern religion? What about Islamic views? What about different religious interpretations in the West? So we have challenges, and these are challenges of reason to ask us to be more consistent. Look, this is a contradiction. You guys say you're for justice, but there's racial injustice. That's a press to be more consistent, right? You need to clean up your act and become more just. Many cultures and civilizations have ceased to exist when their worldviews cease to be credible. So let's say the young people decide, Western values are terrible. Let's get rid of them. Then they won't defend them anymore, and that civilization will die. I kind of feel like we're at a crossroads where the young people have to figure it out. Do they want the West as it's been passed on to them, or do they want something else? And what they pick in terms of something else, is it going to last? Is it going to be on the basis of reason, or is it going to be on the basis of feelings? We got to think this stuff through, guys. Many cultures and civilizations have ceased to exist when their worldviews cease to be credible. When it no longer provides meaning, or when the young people think this isn't worth defending, then it will die. Okay, here's the questions for you to contemplate in your quiet time. The last grouping, okay? Is philosophy fundamentally relevant to all of life? I think you're going to know my answer to that. Is thinking by nature presuppositional? Presuppositional meaning going back to the more basic. More basic first, less basic after that. If there is an agreement on what is more basic, will there be agreement on what is less basic? For example, if we can agree on epistemology and a method for knowing things, could we possibly agree on what we could know? I think so. Are all worldviews equally coherent? If they were, then why do some seem to be incoherent and we want to get rid of them? Inconsistent. Can a culture or civilization survive if its worldview fails to achieve coherence when challenged? So for example, right now in the West, we're having a division in our philosophy. I'll say it's probably a materialist versus a theist assumption challenge. Some assume theism, God exists. Some assume material monism, or there is no God. And that's a division in the West. Those two views are coming to expression and are challenging one another. And if one of those fails to achieve coherence, then it will probably go away. If it's meaningless, people won't defend it. Okay, this wraps up our handout, which was kind of a long discussion on what is philosophy. Hopefully you get a sense of what we're doing now. We looked at philosophy as an area, dealing with foundation and goal, an attitude, which is the love of wisdom, a method, which is the critical use of reason, where we're talking about reason as the laws of thought and reason as the test for meaning. We're going to test the meaning of our own view by the application of reason and self-examination. And then we're going to test systems. Systems has to do with world and life view, and that's what we talked about today. So I hope you have a better sense of what philosophy is. And next time we're going to do an in-depth study on reason, my favorite topic. All right, we'll see you again soon.